the power of the institution of our Chachamim, whether it be for the positive or for the restrictive, is there to also allow God's blessing to take place. We're learning Parashat Beha'alotecha. Parashat Beha'alotecha is our third Torah portion in the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. This Torah portion is quite long. It's not as long as last week's Torah portion, as last week's was the longest Torah portion in our Torah. But Parashat Beha'alotecha is action-packed. Literally, there's a lot going on. So the Zera Shimshon focuses in on one specific point this week. I want to give an introduction to the Zera Shimshon. The Midrash says that before God went around to give the Torah to the Jewish people, He went to all of the nations to offer the Torah to them. For one simple reason. Because, yes, we are the chosen people, but God didn't want to make it so apparent. He wanted to give the option. Maybe one of the other nations would want to accept the Torah as well. This way they could never come and say, it's nepotism. This is the children of your most favorite, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that's why you gave them the Torah. So he went around. He went to the children of Ishmael. He told the children of Ishmael that, would you like to accept the Torah? And they come back and asked God, well, what's in it? So God said, thou shalt not steal. That was by Ishmael. They said, no, we can't steal. We live off stealing. We don't want your Torah. Came to the next nation. He came to the children of Esav. And again they asked, what's written in the Torah if you want to offer it to us? God said, thou shalt not murder. And they said, absolutely not. We live off killing people. We cannot not kill. Take this Torah away. Came to Moav. The Midrash says, and God offered them the Torah. They asked, what's in it? God writes in there that all illicit relationships are prohibited. They said, we can't. That's what we live off of. We don't want the Torah. So after going to the nations and specifically telling each nation what they would never be able to accept, they all rejected it. Right? He didn't go to the Ishmaelim, which live off stealing, that thou shalt not murder. He told each one, knowing they would reject it. This is the Midrash. And then he came to the Jewish people, and he didn't even ask the Jewish people, as we know. We're not going to get into it now. It's not this week's Torah portion. But he forced the accepting of the Torah on the Jewish people, thus making us the chosen nation. This is the Midrash. Whenever I recount this Midrash, I amend it in a joking fashion. But you'll see why. If God would have come to the Jews and not forced giving the Torah, if he would have asked the Jews, would you like to accept the Torah? And the Jewish people would have returned back and said, what's written in it? What would God have said, which is the greatest Jewish transgression? He would have said, thou shalt not complain. Because every good Jew knows how to complain. In Arabic we say kvetch. I'm joking. In Yiddish they say kvetch. Every good Jew knows how to give a good complaint. So we can't blame ourselves for that. We follow in our ancestors' footsteps. It actually dates back over 3,300 years ago to the Jewish people. We see a series of our nation, while being as we know them as the Dor De'ah, the generation of knowledge, they witnessed God firsthand to be very complacent. And because of their complacent nature. They complained when they came out of Egypt. Oh, what? When they got stuck by the Sea of Reeds. Oh, so we're going to drown over here. We're going to die over here. We could have been buried there. Oh, there's no water. Oh, there's no food. There's no this, there's no that. One of the great complaints we see in this week's Torah portion is they were complaining about their dietary laws. They were not given any fruits and vegetables. It says that they wanted radish, watermelon. They wanted how do we say? Cucumbers, zucchini. They wanted all different types of fruits and vegetables. But what was seemingly something that was tremendously bothering them was that they could not have any meat. They only had the wonder bread. They had this manna that was able to taste anything like they wanted it to taste. But they still craved other foods, and out of them all, specifically meat. Having said that, let's read the verse. The verse says in chapter 11, verse 4, "V'asafsuf asher bekirbo hitavu ta'ava." So not only was it the Jews, like all the very sad things, all the traumatic things that happened in the desert, it all started by the mixed multitude. They were the ones who sparked up a little flame, same thing by the sin of the golden calf, and they made lo alenu many of the Jews sin along with it. So the mixed multitude amongst them had started to have cravings. The pasuk continues, "Vayashuvu vayivku." Then the children of Israel came and they started crying. Vayomeru mi yachilenu basar, and they come crying to Moses, "Who's going to feed us meat?" They were craving meat. The Zera Shimshon asks a question. He says, why would God prohibit the Jewish people to eat meat only while they're in the desert? Prior to that, they were able to eat meat. Once they entered the land of Israel, they were able to eat meat again. Why specifically would God prohibit the Jewish people eating meat while they were traveling in the desert? He says either way, if they should be allowed meat forevermore, so let them now even in the desert. And if they were to never have meat again, so let them continue this tradition or this law even when they enter the land of Israel, he asks. So listen to his answer. He says that the Jewish people lived through something very special, and this was the Sinai revelation. Being that they stood at Mount Sinai, of course accepting the Torah, something greater than that happened. They witnessed God giving the Torah to the Jewish people. They saw God, in whatever that means, in any of the commentaries' interpretations, and they heard God first-handly. They were the Dor De'ah, the generation of knowledge. They saw the 10 plagues, they saw the splitting of the sea, they saw the giving of the Torah, they saw the war of Amalek. They lived through the major nisim and miracles, whether it being the Ananei Kavod, the clouds, the manna, the Be'er Miriam, the well of Miriam. They all were very, very special in that. But what made it the most special is that they saw and heard God. The Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says that because they saw God, they were now given this very special blessing that their bodies, after 120, when they die and will be put in the ground, will not be infested with worms and maggots. Every human being, except for tzaddikim gemurim, completely righteous individuals, when a person is buried, nature takes its course, and worms and maggots decompose and eat the flesh of the person. So the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says that the Jews that witnessed Mount Sinai, they saw God, they were blessed. Along with many other blessings that we've already spoken about, they were also blessed that their bodies would not be attacked by worms and maggots when they pass away. So look what the Zera Shimshon now puts together. He puts this together with the prohibition of eating meat. He says if we look in Pirkei Avot, in chapter 2, there's a Mishnah. Some of the Mishnayot, it's Mishnah 7. Some of the versions, it's Mishnah 8. But listen to what the Mishnah tells us. The Mishnah tells us, Marbe basar, marbe rima. The more meat a person eats, the more worms and maggots that body will have when they enter the ground after they pass away. Right? The fatter a person is, the more food there is for the worms and maggots. Now I know this sounds a little cryptic, it's a little scary. It's a fact of life. So look at the Zera Shimshon, look how he connects the two. He says that since the Jewish people witnessed God and heard God firsthand, and they were given a blessing not to ever have their body, when they pass away, attacked by worms and maggots, God said, you, and only you, this generation, will not be able to have any meat in order for that blessing to take place when they pass away. So it's like works hand in hand. Since they didn't eat meat, they did not decompose with worms and maggots. But why did that come about? Because they witnessed God and heard God by the revelation of Sinai when they got the Torah. So it goes hand in hand. But now listen to the best part of it all. He says, wait a minute. When the Jewish people inaugurated the tabernacle, the Mishkan, weren't they bringing sacrifices? And he goes on, weren't they eating the meat of the sacrifices as well? And the answer is yes, they were. So how does that fit? Were they allowed to eat meat? Or were they not allowed to eat meat? Were their bodies to decompose with worms and maggots or not? So listen to his chidush. His chidush is, as he quotes it, based on a Kabbalistic concept that any physical involvement and enjoyment a Jew undergoes while fulfilling a mitzvah cannot work against them. He says, the concept of a seudat mitzvah is so underrated. When a person partakes in food, whether it be carbs or vegetables or even fish and meat, but it's part of a seudat mitzvah. What's a seudat mitzvah? It's a meal of a mitzvah. For example, Shabbat, Yom Tov, Korbanot were also a mitzvah. It was Kodashim. It was of the holies. When a Jew partakes in a mitzvah, even though they are physically enjoying, none of that can work against them. And that would mean that the meat that they would eat from the korbanot, from the sacrifices, that was not considered ordinary meat. That was seudat mitzvah. That was a meal of mitzvah. And therefore, that meat, and those pounds, if you'd want to say, that they ate and they gained from the meat of the korbanot, never worked against them, that when they would pass away, their body would decompose with worms and maggots. And that means to us as well. Even though nowadays, we could have any meat we want as long as it's kosher. It doesn't need to be from the mizbeach, from the altar. It doesn't need to be from the kodashim, from any sacrifices. Any kosher meat we can eat at any time, for the most part, besides Avilut, and now we're coming up the summer season during the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. But for all intents and purposes, meat is fully permitted to us. Kosher meat. But there's a different aspect. There's an aspect. It's when are you eating for yourself, or when are you eating when it's part of a mitzvah? A bar mitzvah, a brit milah, a seudat hatan v'kala, a meal for a wedding, or sheva brachot even, Shabbat and Yom Tov. When we partake in those seudot, in those meals cannot work against us because we're doing it with the intention to fulfill God's will. You're doing the same thing. On Friday lunch, you're going to go and you're going to have a shawarma, and that's meat and carbs, and that could not be the healthiest. But you could have meat and carbs 24 hours later, or even just that night. But because you're doing it because it's on Shabbat, and it's for the mitzvah of the meal of Shabbat, that can't go and harm you. There's a famous saying we all know, that there's no such thing as Shabbat pounds. And we all allude to that joke saying, yeah, because it's prohibited to go on a scale on Shabbat, so you couldn't check what you ate and gained, so it doesn't really count. But whether you go on the scale after Shabbat or not, and you see that you've gained or not, if a person really is mechaven, a person really concentrates and comes to the conclusion, the reason why they are eating now is because God wants us to eat now, it's a mitzvah to eat now, all of that can't go to harm us. But you know when the test is? The test is, how do you eat all week long? That's the test. How do you eat all week long? Are you having meat every day for lunch and supper? Are you pigging out, as we like to say all the time? Or are you eating enough to survive and be healthy, which is important also? Shabbat and Yom Tov, and any type of other Seudat Mitzvah, weddings and Bar Mitzvahs and Brit Milot, all of that, that's when we're able to let loose. Because it shows that we're letting loose and we're engaging and enjoying for the mitzvah. So we learn this from the fact that the Jewish people were not allowed meat in the desert. They complained, we want more meat. They had a meat, they had enough. They had enough for a Seudat Mitzvah. But they wanted more. You wanted more, you're not allowed more. That's not the right thing. They were at a higher level. We're also at a very high level. Come to Shiur Torah. We understand the difference between a regular meal and a meal for a mitzvah. But now let's act upon it. And acting upon it is very easy. Just activating our minds, engaging and understanding that right now we're sitting for a mitzvah meal. And this meal cannot harm me in any way. It's only going to be beneficial. Obviously, if we eat and drink responsibly. But that is a very important concept we learned this week from the complaint of the Jewish people complaining for more meat.